Welcome back to another episode of Light of the World podcast. We are on today with Hieromonk Theodore, and he is not only a hieromonk here at Jordanville, but is also a lecturer at Holy Trinity Orthodox Seminary of Theology. I'm Andre Slivin.
And I'm John Keller.
And this is episode 2. Father, could you start us with a prayer, please?
O Heavenly King, come for the Spirit of truth, our present and fill us all things, treasure good things and give our life, come and abide in us, cleanse from all impurities and save our souls, O good one.
Amen. So today's topic is catechism. To be fair, as a cradle, this was a very unfamiliar topic for me. Both. I didn't really hear about it.
Both cradles.
Yeah, we're both cradles here. So we were never told as children about what catechism is. And as we grew up, we slowly became more and more familiar with the term. But it's still somewhat of a new thing for a lot of people in the Orthodox world, especially Orthodox inquirers. They want to know more about it. How do you become Orthodox? So I wanted to ask you, Father, could you define us in your own words? What is catechism, and tell us a little bit about your own story?
So, catechism is the process in which a person is prepared for baptism, and they are taught the teachings, dogmas, practices of the Orthodox faith, and they are led towards preparation for being initiated into the church. And this period of catechism should be the building block of a whole life of spiritual development in the church. So, in ancient times, we were aware that there was a 3-year catechumenate, and it was very intensive. And these people, as we still know in our liturgy, were dismissed halfway through the service and taken away for the catechism. And after 3 years, they would be brought into the church, usually on Pascha. Nowadays, we do not have a 3-year catechism for anyone, as far as I'm aware. I don't think anywhere is as rigorous as that. And we have a variety of methods now of catechizing, depending on where you are. So I have my own particular experience of how I was received into the church. I have the experiences of other priests I've spoken to and asked how they carry out catechism nowadays. And then we have official catechisms, catechetical programs, catechetical books, online catechisms, which now exist, which are distributed officially by various dioceses or synods of the church in various places. So there's a multiplicity of methods of catechizing people nowadays. So it shows there's no fixed way. There is no one way of catechizing people. For example, large established parishes, and I would say one of the most noble ones is St. Andrew's Orthodox Church in Riverside, California, pastored by Father Josiah Trenum, has a very organized catechetical process with classes at least once a week. I'm not too sure exactly how often they are, but there is a fixed curriculum, if you will. There's a fixed reading list, and people are brought through the catechetical process in batches. You will go through with the same number of people for the same number of weeks. Contrast that, for example, to the less organized one-on-one catechisms you get in smaller parishes and in missions, which are usually tailor-fit to the person being catechized based on his spiritual, religious background, his capability for reading. Some people are capable of more advanced reading than others, and the priest can take this into account. And somewhere in between this, in the middle, we have a very unique catechetical process which was carried out by Father Daniel Sasoev in Russia. And he had a series of 5 lectures that you had to attend before being baptized into the church. And they were basically on a continual cycle at the St. Daniel the Prophet Orthodox Parish in Moscow. And you could drop in on the 3rd week, and then attend the 4th, the 5th, and then the 1st and the 2nd again, and then you'd be considered ready for baptism. The idea was as long as you went to all 5 of them, maybe you could have several weeks between each, as long as you attended all 5 of those lectures and were a regular attending the church.
What kind of topics would be present at those lectures? The
basics of the Orthodox faith, morality, ethics, preparation for baptism, what baptism actually means, and what happens practically when you're baptized. So he would go into these things just so people knew what they were getting into. And bear in mind, he probably started this in the kind of early to mid 1990s in Russia, which is a real, you could call it the Wild West of Orthodox catechism. The church was rebuilding itself from nothing back then, and there was some very dynamic people out there, Father Daniel being one of the most prominent, who were really working hard to bring as many people into the church as possible, but also properly prepare them. We know there was cases when people were just brought into the church without any preparation, and as we know from experience, people who are not prepared properly for baptism, not prepared properly for the Orthodox Christian struggle, they can fall by the wayside. So prior preparation is extremely important for anybody being received into the church. In the case of children, however, who are baptized as babies, or maybe sometimes a little bit later, this is different. They're brought into the church on the faith of their parents and their godparents, and it's the parents and godparents and the parish priest who are expected to slowly over time educate that young child in the Christian faith. So they're not being prepared prior to baptism, they're being prepared for a life after baptism when they come to maturity and they begin to really take the faith seriously for themselves. So you mentioned the cradle-convert distinction, and I'm not sure if that's a real helpful term anymore. Obviously, people exist who were born and baptized into the church very early, and people exist who were received later in life. But we're all converts, really, in the sense that everybody at some point in their life makes a serious, collected decision to follow Christ seriously and make the Orthodox life the priority for them. So, you could be baptized as a baby and you convert at 18, you can convert at 50, you can convert on your deathbed. We know that people repent after life lived not taking church too seriously, living far from the life of Christ, from the sacraments and things like that. So we all convert at some point. And catechism, for someone who's been baptized as a baby, of course, Sunday school is the foundation for them. That is catechism for those baptized as infants. And it's very important to have education for the children in parishes and places where the Orthodox go. So this can only take you so far. Because as a child you absorb so much information, but there's also home life, and home life also needs to be strongly directed towards Christian life, towards prayer, towards spirituality, towards struggling and for virtue in the Orthodox way. And as we know that some people might go to Sunday school, but at home, there's not much prayer, there's not many, not spiritual readings and things like that. And of course, there's also the world. If you go to public school, or if you live in a place where there's not many Christians, or a post-Christian or secular environment, as they're kind of called nowadays, that can have an influence you as well. And then there's the media. So Sunday school can only really inoculate people spiritually to a certain degree, because the older you get, we know that there's probably less education for the children. They tend to focus on the small kids. So when someone converts as has an inner conversion, you'd say, when they're older, 18 or in their 20s, sometimes this quite frequently occurs at college, or when they start their own family, that's when people start taking the faith seriously. They must find a way of catechizing themselves, and luckily there are many parishes which have, say, adult education courses, which are kind of a form of post-catechism for those who are re-engaging with the faith, and they can be very helpful. Or they can just simply read books. They can pick up books and start educating themselves in the faith. So there are many ways to do this. Here in Jordanville, for example, we don't have a fixed program for catechizing people who come to us to be received into the church. Usually the potential Orthodox Christian is they first meet the community, they'll speak with the bishop, and then he will assign them to one of the fathers here for catechism, and I give catechism to some people who have converted to the faith here. And basically what we do is individualize it. So the person's gauged for their background, their knowledge, their ability to read and engage in sort of various levels of Orthodox and spiritual literature. And then, the process begins, and it can take longer for some people. Some people can be received into church very quickly, they're already prepared. So it takes time. Ultimately, the bishop is the one who gives the final decision as to when the person is received into the church. He will keep an eye on them, he will speak with them and things like that. But the person who's doing the catechizing is the one who has the most frequent interactions with them, and they can see the development. But of course, catechism is not all about books and information. That's only part of it. As we know, Orthodoxy is, consists of two elements. There's the praxis, which is probably more important than the theory. And the theory is contained in the catechetical books and talks and lectures and things like that. But praxis is an equally important part of Orthodox catechism. So teaching people the basics of the faith is one, but showing them how to live a basic Orthodox life is another. People coming into the church from a non-liturgical Protestant background or a non-religious background, they need to know how to behave in church. They know how to make the sign of the cross, how to venerate the icons, how to, the various pious practices that we have in the church. They need to learn to know how to join in the services prayerfully. And not to be kind of lost amongst these mysterious things that are happening that they're getting used to. They need to know fasting of the church. They need to know the cycle of services, how the services are composed, and how to realise what's going on. So there's a lot of practical element to catechism as well, and that simply comes through attending church. So frequent attendance at church is extremely important for a catechumen, probably more so than sitting down and reading books. You need to learn how to join in with the life of the church, that church that you're going to be participating in until the day you die. You need to become prepared for it and learn how to initiate yourself into the cycles and seasons, if you will, of liturgical life in the church.
Can I ask, what you mentioned that there are people that become Orthodox, they convert from a Protestant background or other Christian denominations, and there are people that sometimes become Orthodox, well, oftentimes, from straight atheism. Especially, I've seen this happen amongst Russian immigrants who were raised in the Soviet Union, and that's also very different from an American, for example, atheist or an agnostic that has no Christian background at all. What kind of differences have you seen, and what kind of things do you do applying catechism to these different people and these different groups?
Well, I haven't had much experience of catechizing, say, Russians who have come and re-engaged with the faith of their forefathers. And I think it would be easier for them because Orthodox is such a important central part of the Russian environment and Russian history that people, they kind of subconsciously know it. They've picked up, even if they were raised in an atheistic life, they probably picked up things from the babushka. It's almost natural to a lot of these people. So for them, it's just more or less kind of quality control and leading them into a knowledge of the church life itself, as not just the should we say the ritual aspects. People know how to make the sign of the cross and things like this. But they seem to take to it quite well, as far as I've heard from people. From them coming from a straight atheist. Well, I mean, my background was in atheism, and I, had a path to Orthodox, which took a couple of years.
Could we ask you to briefly summarize that path? Would you be comfortable sharing that right now, or another time?
Well, maybe another time. I've spoke about it in other places.
It's a good story. It's a long one, but it's a good one.
Yeah, it's probably a bit out of place for this conversation. But I grew up as a practical atheist and worked my way into the church, and I had to pick up how to be in church, how to stand there, how to observe the services, how to participate in them, making the sign of the cross and things like that. How to act Orthodox. And this is only picked up by being around Orthodox people and absorbing it by osmosis. And so community life is such an important part of becoming Orthodox. It can't be underemphasized at all. So many different people, and to kind of talk about these different backgrounds, it's very interesting. I'll mention a priest I know back in Scotland. He's the archimandrite at the Greek Orthodox Cathedral St Luke in my hometown Glasgow, and I remember speaking to him, and he was as the kind of the main point of contact for people who were converting in that parish back when I was attending there, but 10 years ago, just over 10 years ago. He was a deacon back then, and he was telling me how he receives different people into the church, or rather he prepares people for reception into the church, and he has sort of like a matrix in his mind for different people. So for him, and this was a very interesting take, was that the more devout you were in a different Christian group, the more serious you took it, the more in-depth your life and knowledge of this was, the longer it would take for you to become Orthodox. So he saw catechism not only as a learning process, but as a deprogramming. And it was very interesting. So he basically said to me, an atheist who comes to me will be baptized within 3 months because he has a clean slate. He has nothing to build upon.
Oh, wow.
He doesn't believe in God. Now he believes God exists, and it's now our job to tell him who that God is, what he's revealed to us, and what his message is. Someone who is a Protestant, back in Scotland to be Presbyterian, who wasn't really, he was Church of Scotland, but he didn't really attend, doesn't really know the teachings of the church, went maybe once a year, maybe less. He's going to take maybe, 6 to 9 months, because he has some ideas, but he needs to be kind of brought into how it is to be Orthodox. Somebody who's a traditional Catholic, we're not talking about your regular run-of-the-mill Roman Catholics, but a serious traditionalist Roman Catholic who, goes to the Latin Mass, is very, very serious, very, very pious. He says no less than 3 years. And now, I don't know if he strictly kept to that. Probably the priest in charge at that time might have told him to kind of hurry up a little bit. But he says, it's going to take you 3 years to be properly ready for the Orthodox Church. And, there's an interesting point of view there, because in many senses, Roman Catholics are more similar to Orthodoxy than, say, Protestant is. So there's so many similarities there, but there's also so many differences. And those similarities sort of mask the differences. So I think the process is longer, because you need to detach the ideas that you have as a Roman Catholic with the externals of Roman Catholic Church, which may be similar to us, the liturgy, etc. And detach those, and then, bring the Orthodox idea together with it. And that's it's a process. So I never know if he made anybody wait the full 3 years, but nonetheless, he said that was the ideal time. For a Muslim becoming Orthodox, he says about 18 months.
18 months.
18 months.
Less than a Roman Catholic.
Yeah, because there's it's the subtle differences in Catholicism. I mean, if you're a former Muslim and you're willing to reject that faith, you've got no hang-ups. You dropped that. But Catholicism has a lot of hang-ups, and the papacy being the one. There's a lot of people who will accept everything the Orthodox Church teaches, but just the idea of the papacy just clings to them, and it makes it very, very difficult to break from that and to become Orthodox. So it's that was an interesting point of view. From my personal experience, the people I've catechized have almost exclusively been people who are lapsed Roman Catholics or lapsed Protestants, and they didn't really know much about the faith to begin with. So they're semi-blank slates. And
how long did it take for them?
Usually a couple of months.
Okay.
No more than 3 or 4. One was received very quickly because there was various reasons, and the bishop told me to accelerate his catechism. So we basically squeezed about 6 months of catechism into 6 weeks. But obviously, somebody who is in an accelerated catechism like that, because of reasons beyond his and our control, I set a very high standard for him. I says to him, I want you to come here to the monastery 4 times a week for catechism. You're going to attend Vespers twice a week, and then we're going to do catechism afterwards. You're going to come on Saturday afternoons. We'll catechize, then we'll go to vigil. And then on Sunday after liturgy, we'll do more catechism. And, I wanted to see dedication, because if we're going to make some kind of concessions for people, they need to also show that they're serious. You can make a concession for somebody, you can let them into the church at less time than would be normal, and it might not be enough. So I need to see determination and dedication to become an Orthodox. And he was there every time. And, he's still with us. So it was
here in our community?
Well, he doesn't. He had to leave the area. That was why he was baptized so quickly. So he's not in the area anymore. But he's still, he's attending church, and he's, in a sense, he's gone native, because he lives close to Orthodox countries, and he's been visiting monasteries and going on pilgrimages, and he's already made his first trip to Mount Athos.
Oh, wow.
So he's really went on a deep dive into the faith. So he was the right person to do that, and this was, the bishop's call. He made that decision. He has the discernment, and I just act on his instructions. For other people, it was a bit slower, and we've had some people that didn't make it to the end of catechism for various reasons. So I've experienced a couple of different people in a direct face-to-face capacity. Other kinds of catechism, if you would call it that I've done, I've probably done more people this way, is by distance. We're a well-known monastery, and we get a lot of people who contact us because, you'll search Orthodoxy on the internet or something, and the Jordanville website is somehow comes up quite early in the search pages. So we have people from different parts of the world, sometimes United States, but more often from foreign countries, who have discovered Orthodoxy somehow. And they reach out to the monastery, and they basically just say, I want to become Orthodox, please help me. And so I've had people in India contact us, we've had people in Burma, Sri Lanka was one of them, Jamaica, various places, Bahamas, Barbados, Caribbean is turning to Orthodoxy quite slowly. So people in various countries, mostly Asia and the Caribbean that I've experienced, but also in America, someone will reach out to you. So, and one of my obediences at the monastery is to communicate with these people, ask them questions, send them some books as part of the missionary aspect of our monastery. We'll send them some literature. I'll send them a good catechism book, a Jordanville prayer book, maybe something that's specific to their background, addressing the differences between us and Catholicism, if they're a former Catholic, or Protestantism, if they're a former Protestant, or, maybe something by Father Seraphim Rose, if they're from a New Age background or something. So you have to kind of get to, a bit of knowledge of where that person's coming from. And, if they're in America, I'll just try and find the local church for them. And I'll say, well, this is 45 minutes from your house, go there. And then hopefully they'll go, and then they'll go through the process. People who live in countries where there's no Orthodox presence, I will find the nearest priest I can. Sometimes it's maybe 1,500 miles away. And we'll try and work something out.
So anyone watching this video right now, theoretically, for example, an Orthodox inquirer that wants to become Orthodox can just reach out to you and say, Father Theodore, I need help. Can you give me some, books or lectures or something? And that starts the process? Yeah,
I mean, the Jordanville website is a contact form, and I receive those messages. And the bishop encouraged me to deal with them appropriately.
We'll leave links in the comments to the website. Also, here, let me adjust your mic quickly. I think John had a question too.
You were mentioning about the different processes of lengths of time with people from different backgrounds, Roman Catholics, Protestants, Muslims, Jews, etc. There's a debate. Better? Is that better in there?
Yeah, it's much better.
I'm still learning the mic, folks. There's a debate in the Orthodox world where one person from a Christian background comes to the Orthodox Church, whether he should be rebaptized, also known as a corrective baptism, or simply chrismated. I know in Jordanville...
let me just correct you there. That's not a rebaptism. It's just baptism. There is no baptism outside of Orthodox
That's what they're
Church.
saying, because you can get baptized in the Catholic Church.
Well, there is one baptism for the remission of sins, and this is within the Holy Orthodox Church. So it's not corrective baptism. A corrective baptism is something which, for pastoral considerations, is given to somebody who has been received into the church anomalously, in a problematic way. So this is somebody who's already been brought into the church by some means, and they, for pastoral reasons, they are given Orthodox baptism as a reassurance, because people can be led into a spiritual crisis by not being received into the church properly. So if someone comes to the church from a Roman Catholic, Protestant background, they are baptized, they're not rebaptized. This we have to be very clear, because rebaptism is a sin, because you don't baptize someone twice. So rebaptism is when you take an Orthodox person who's been baptized already and then do it again. And that would lead to priests being defrocked and many things like that. So they're baptized. And there has been, some times when the church has allowed various other means to do that. And, that's a big, long debate, and it's a current debate. But all I'll say as a hieromonk in the Russian church abroad is we baptize. This was a decision made by our synod for various reasons that we will baptize. And this was made in the early 1970s. And it's never been revoked, it's never been changed, and this is what we do.
Is this because calling it a rebaptism would imply that the Roman Catholic baptism is legitimate?
Of course. That would assume, why would you receive something in the church by baptism if they've been baptized already?
Right.
So we baptize because they were not baptized before. We don't consider those sacraments to be real.
Also, earlier you were mentioning that Vladika Luke gives you an obedience of assigning people. What's the current number of godsons or goddaughters that you have? Or godsons, probably?
Well, there's no direct correlation between godsons and people you've catechized. However, I have 4 godsons. One was a small child. He's my friend's son that I baptized before I came to the monastery. I didn't baptize myself. I was his godfather before I came to the monastery. And then I have 3 godsons whom were baptized here at the monastery and were catechized by me to a greater or lesser degree. And I was told to take them as my godsons. One I baptized myself. 2 others I was merely present at the baptism. Yeah. So I do try to avoid getting too many godchildren, because we have a responsibility towards them, and you don't want to overwhelm yourself with too many people. But if the bishop tells me to be the person sponsor, I'll do it. And I always make sure, when I have a godson, that they communicate with me frequently. So This is one of
Well, that
those.
was going to be my next question.
Okay.
Like,
Don't want to preempt you then.
I have a couple godchildren, and for people out there who also have a couple godchildren and also who are planning to be godmothers or godfathers, what do you have to say to them, knowing the responsibility that they're going to put on themselves? Of course, it's not just a title or like a nice photo op after the baptism. What is it actually to be a godparent?
You have a responsibility. Traditionally, if the parents died, the godparent would be the one who took the child into his home.
Really?
That obviously does not happen anymore. This was in ancient times, but it's a close relationship. So if you are the sponsor, godfather of an adult coming into the church, well, he's not a child. It's different. He's coming from his own volition. He wants to be Orthodox. So, you don't have to give as much guidance to him in those matters. You don't have to convince him to stay in the church, at least at the beginning. So maybe some problems might come up later on, and that's your job to be able to, convince this person to, reconsider if they have any strange ideas. But of course, your responsibility towards this person is to, if it's an adult convert, is to be a friend to them, to be a close confidant, somebody they can, discuss frankly the spiritual situation. Obviously, you're not a confessor or a spiritual father or anything, but they can talk to you about their ups and downs in the church life. You can help them take their baby steps in the church. You can be the guy who shows them how to venerate icons properly, take them on the first pilgrimage to a monastery, things like that. You become a spiritual friend to this person. You're bound to them through the sacrament of baptism. So, you need to keep regular contact with them. That's essential. If they go to the same parish as you, then that's much easier. If you're the godparent of a child, well, obviously the parents have the primary responsibility in raising and educating that child in the faith. You're not going to be there every single day. But again, if the child's at the same parish as you, you need to be, close to that child. You need to be helping them come to a great understanding of the faith. You're the one that takes them to communion. Of course, when they're a small baby. And as they get older, it's kind of your responsibility to make sure they keep up their, what we call spiritual education. You can buy them books on their name day and feast days at Christmas and things like that. And, again, when they get older, you can be the first person to take them for a monastery pilgrimage if they've never done it before. Things like that. So, again, you're not so much a spiritual friend as you would be with someone who's a peer to you in your age, but you're a godfather. So you have a almost paternal relationship with this person in a spiritual sense. You don't have to deal with the, getting them to clean the dishes at night or anything. So it's a lot less drama in that sense. So you're dealing with them specifically, primarily in terms of their religious upbringing. Making sure, if their family's, God forbid, not too pious, don't pray very often, then it's your responsibility to encourage that child to pray. And you encourage them to come to church if the family doesn't come very often. You have to be there to bring them, physically take the child if the parents allow you to church.
Just steal them. You're breaking the house.
Well, legal issues there. So, you need to be the person who's encouraging that child. And especially when they get to the teenage years, you need to be a sympathetic ear. Because children have maybe problems with their parents. They don't want to talk to them about things. They'll confess to the priest, but sometimes they won't be frank with them. But hopefully you've developed a relationship with that child that when they get to that age, they'll be able to be frank with you. And, there's a closeness there. My godmother, when I was baptised, she's not too much older than me. And, she became a very good friend. Her and her husband, they would allow me to come and stay at their house. I was at their wedding. I stayed at his family's house in Greece when I visited. So I became sort of a member of their extended family. Her parents and his parents saw me as their first grandson, basically. And that's the way I was treated when I met them in Greece. So that's the kind of relationship that you need to cultivate with your godchildren. Your family needs to sort of bring them into your extended family. They need to treat them almost as if they're a child of yours and show them that love. So it's very important. So it's not just you're the guy who's there when they get baptized. You're not there to just assist in the catechism, but it's a whole life thing. It's a whole family that you're bringing them into, and that is for people say who don't have a very pious and devout family. That could be a godsend for that person because you're the person they rely on to help them in their spiritual life, bring them to church, keep them encouraged to keep studying the faith, to keep living the life, etc., etc. So big responsibility.
Wait, one more word. Sorry. Sorry.
Go ahead.
I learned the ability of how to talk on a mic, so I'm pretty hot right now, hot streak.
I'm glad I'm happy.
You said teenage, and that just kind of sparked another question in me. Converts have various stories, various backgrounds of how they came to the Orthodox faith. As a cradle, you're kind of forced into the Orthodox faith, as I like to joke. You're just dunked in the waters.
I consented as a child.
Well, I didn't,
as a baby,
but I later did. So I'm going to change something real quick. Andre, you and I are cradles.
Right.
There came a point in your life, which Father Theodore, you would agree, the teenage years are the most crucial, whether a child stays active in the Orthodox faith, especially if they're going off to college, or they just kind of slowly just veer off. Andre, what made you stay in the Orthodox faith? Sorry, I didn't write that down or prepare you.
So I don't want to get too dark here, but it was probably my older brother just overdosing one day on accident. He wasn't like a drug addict or anything, just took Xanax one day. He was 22. I'm 23 right now, so I'm older than him now. But just one morning, my mom and I were on vacation with my younger brother, and we got a call from a police officer named Officer Lamb. And he was like, "Oh, this is about Victor." And I was like, "Wow, this is strange." And my mom picked it up, and he was like, "Oh, he passed away. He's dead." Just out of the blue. And I remember standing in church, and I could feel myself slowly pulling away. And seeing his body there, I remember looking at it, and something in me just kind of started like turning. What actually happened was shortly afterwards, when I was standing in church about a month after we buried him, I think it was 17 at the time. I ran out of church actually. I couldn't stand there anymore. I don't know what happened. I just didn't want to be in there. I saw like old Babushki walking around and smiling where his body was, a month ago. And I thought that was the point where I was going to actually leave the church. But it was like a ricochet, kind of a slingshot effect in a sense, where actually I felt myself getting pulled back in more. Because he wasn't sick with cancer. I didn't have time to prepare. It was just straight up out of the blue. Just one morning, hey, he's dead. That's it. And that rattled something in me, because I realized, okay, I could be next. Actually, I remember last year, right before I turned 23 on Pascha, I was thinking, am I living on borrowed time? Is my time coming right now? And it definitely woke something up in me. So I think that was a turning point for me personally. I hope that doesn't ever happen to anyone here that's listening, that's in this room. But I guess it's something that I needed, and I think that if he were still alive, I genuinely might just be chilling in some college right now, using they them pronouns or something, and thinking, oh yeah, I was once a Christian. How silly! It makes you think mortality and death. It definitely makes something click in you. Sorry, I went on a bit of a rant.
You're fine. You're fine.
Yeah. Father, I had a question for you that's been burning inside of me. A few weeks ago, I met a young man who is 17. So technically speaking, he's actually a child. And he was telling me about these Discord servers that are sometimes run by people who aren't even Orthodox, but that host thousands of Orthodox people, or inquirers, I should say. This, as a cradle, this blew my mind, because I'd never heard of that. I never heard of these online communities where people are thriving and speaking and conversing about the Orthodox faith. He did mention that a lot of them are quite dangerous, though, because there are people who are not qualified to teach others, who are sort of performing a sort of catechism, in a sense, towards others. Now, what we have sanctioned by the church is priests and godparents, educating people and kind of exhorting them to keep their faith. What are your thoughts on this sort of internet boom, especially amongst like the Discord servers?
Well, it's almost like the internet is the new Areopagus. Everybody's got their own ideas to share. There's discussion taking place all the time. And, as we know, St. Paul preached in the Areopagus, and he converted people. So there can be good there. We can't say technology is bad, therefore avoid the internet. Mm-hmm. It's a very useful tool, and we have to use any means possible to spread the Orthodox faith. That being said, anybody who takes up a teaching position within the church, not just priests, laymen can obviously be blessed by the church to catechize and to teach and, be theology professors and things like that. But to have an untested layman teach, or think he's teaching catechism to thousands of people is a real is a recipe for disaster. I have nothing against Discord servers or any sort of media that allows people to discuss orthodoxy. The point being is it needs to be done properly, as in all things. Everything needs to be done well. It needs to be done with the blessing of the church, and it needs to be led by people who know what they're talking about. That's important. You get a lot of people who are fresh-baked converts to the church, and they have zeal, which is good, but they don't have the knowledge, which is bad. And they decide they're going to go and convert their entire generation to Orthodoxy. The zeal like that needs to be taken and needs to be used properly. If you just create your own chat room, invite people to join, and then start preaching Orthodoxy, well, some good's going to come for that, God willing. But at the same time, you're not doing yourself any good, because, being somebody teaching who's not prepared, you can fall into error very easily. If you don't have a guide, you can get proud. So it can be spiritually damaging as well. So, that's why people need to be patient. They need to put themselves under the yoke of obedience, as it were, and just keep your mouth shut if you are not allowed to be teaching, if you're not in a place to be teaching. It's simple as that. But we can't disregard these things entirely. It's very good. It's very fruitful. I've met dozens and dozens and dozens of young men at the monastery or in other places I've visited. I've given talks to the Orthodox Christian Fellowship or been to parishes where there's a lot of young people. And, where did you discover Orthodoxy is usually responded by some place on the internet. That's just the reality of life now. That's a fact of life, and it's neither good nor bad. It's just how things are, and the church needs to adapt to that. So we can't condemn these things unless they're seriously misleading people. If somebody's deliberately teaching error, people make mistakes. That's one thing. The difference between a person making a mistake and a heretic is the first person, might allow themselves to be corrected. A heretic will not be corrected. So, if people are teaching errors in there, if somebody more aware of the truths of the faith is able to correct them and the person listens, well, that's good. All those people in the Discord chat will see that person being corrected and humbly accepting it, and they'll know that this error has been corrected and they've learned from that. That's a positive thing. If they just ban the person for correcting them, then we've got sectarianism beginning. So yeah, you do get some priests who condemn anybody teaching on the internet and things like that. But we need to make a distinction between those who are just doing their own thing, which is probably the majority. I'll give them credit there. Probably the majority are doing their own thing. They don't have a blessing. But there is some who have a blessing. They have the approval of their spiritual father, or maybe of their bishop, and what they're doing is good. And I'm not going to say who's good and who's bad, because I don't involve myself in these things. I don't read them. I don't participate. So I can't really say. I know they exist, and I know that a lot of good has come from it, and probably a lot of bad as well. And unfortunately, that's anything. Anybody who takes up a self-appointed teacher, a self-appointed teaching role, is going to have some good effects, because the gospel of Orthodox Christianity is always going to have good effects when it's preached properly. But again, depending on the person, they can spread error by mistake, or they might do it in a spirit which is wrong. Right. So what we want to avoid is Twitter orthodoxy. People just making half-baked hot takes on the theological discussions of the day without really getting involved in it, without really reading the fathers, without really seeing what the church teaches. There's a lot of people nowadays that like to spout pop theology, and they'll say things which are actually not true. And a lot of people, just because a lot of people believe a mistake doesn't mean it's not an error. And so again, it needs to be. People need to just practice a bit of self-control. But now the thing is with the internet and the things like social media and Discord servers and other chat rooms, the hierarchy cannot control them. Simple as that. Yeah. You can stop people from preaching in the church. If somebody comes up on the Anvon and preaches heresy, he's gone. He's suspended from preaching. He will not be allowed to do that again, and action will be taken. You cannot control the internet. So the best thing is people can be obviously advised to just take everything with a huge pile of salt that they read on these places. Take the good, be cautious about what seems to be strange, and avoid the bad. And always consult with your own parish priest, and the writings of the church and the church fathers, the official catechisms, things that have stood the test of time. Discord chat rooms will come and go, but the ancient catechisms of the church are going to be with us forever. They've been accepted and they've been passed down, and they're revered for the reasons why they have the truths of the faith manifest within them. So always check things against serious ecclesiastical authority. You know, we need to always be aware. But a sensible person would do that. I mean, you're not going to just trust some anonymous person on the internet with your eternal salvation, or you shouldn't. And if you take, you know, this person's opinion as gospel and don't check up on it, then, you know, you've only got yourself to blame. You know, so everything should be treated with caution. I mean, when you go to the Areopagus in ancient Greece, everybody's got a different philosophical opinion, and it's up to you to listen and to discern, and, you know, see which ones are way off and which ones are closer to the truth. And those who were genuinely searching for truth would be, you know, people like Saint Dionysius, who became one of the first early bishops of the church and a great theologian. So, you know, there's a lot of bad ideas on the internet, but there's a lot of people who are trying to get orthodoxy out there. There's a lot of what we call official content, which is, you know, from priests and people like that, which is very helpful. But, you know, the laymen as well, they're doing their bit, but it needs to be properly, you know, managed by themselves. They need to get the proper blessings. They need to be sure what they're teaching is solid, and not to get carried away by their own egos, which is a problem we can all face at any time.
I have a really heated question that's building off of this, and once again, you don't have to answer it, but there are often instances of people who are providing Orthodox teachings and educating others who are not baptized Orthodox Christians.
Run away from such people.
So,
if you're not a member of the church, you know, you have no right to teach. You know what? Because if you're not a member of the church, you're an outsider. Simple as that.
So technically speaking, catechumens are still somewhat on the outside.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And
so they should not be instructing thousands of people on Discord servers.
Of course not. Only experienced Orthodox Christians
Get
should be doing
dumped
stuff
first.
like that.
You heard it from Father Theodore.
Yes. If you're outside the church, you have no right to be teaching the Orthodox faith to anybody, because you don't know yourself. You know, becoming Orthodox is not something, you know, happens just because you've picked up a few books. You know, and yeah, you're a catechumen, but, you know, I've read everything. I've read all the files. My priest doesn't really know that much. You know, you need to be educated. You need to be baptized. Then you receive the Holy Spirit, which enlightens you. And then, with a few years in the church, you know, then just maybe, you might be ready to teach. But before then, absolutely not.
Right.
I know here in Jordanville we have, 3-year rule of people who are baptized. They have to wait until they actually be admitted into seminary. How many years?
I think it's
2 years. 2 years.
So it's two. 3 is ideal, but 2 is permitted before they come to seminary. But
what's the reason for that?
Well, I mean,
just for them to live like a full cycle, a couple cycles of the church.
Of course, you need to experience the full life of the church. If you come straight out of the font and come to seminary, you're not going to be ready for that. There's an element of spiritual struggle that comes to undertaking the seminary life or the monastic life, and, you know, people might not be quite ready for that. So they need to be tested in a parish to make sure that they're capable. And, you know, you don't send people to seminary whom you don't really know if they've got a priestly vocation or the capability of doing that. So spending 2 years in a parish minimum, and a third year makes it even better. You know, the priest who sends you gets a better idea of your character, your strengths, your weaknesses, your abilities. But, you know, so that's the thing. You know, that's not necessarily even teaching. That's to learn in seminary. You need to be in the church for a couple of years. You know, and then, you know, when you graduate from seminary, you know, say you come at the shortest possible time. So 2 years after you get baptized, you're in seminary. You graduate after 4 years. That's 6 years in the church before you're allowed to do anything, teach. And then, you know, you might leave seminary and you won't necessarily be allowed to teach in a parish until you get ordained. If, you know, depending on the parish priest. So there can be exceptions to that. There can be people who come to seminary very soon after the baptisms, and they're fine. But generally, experience shows us that people, especially young guys who come into the church, they've discovered Orthodoxy on Discord, they learn, you know, the faith. They've read everything, and, you know, they know all the church fathers.
Yeah.
And I'm going to come to seminary now. And guess what? You don't have a seminarian. You have a teacher, you know, in the seminary, or somebody thinks is a teacher. That's problematic as well, you know. So, you know, and that zeal might not get them through seminary. You know, they get there and they realise that, well, there's a lot more to being an Orthodox Christian, and I've realised there's serious struggles that didn't exist before, because it's, you know, it's not the honeymoon period after baptism where we get to experience, you know, the real Christian life. It's when we get to the struggles, you know, when God allows us to start walking our own 2 feet, and we need to survive the temptations and the distractions of life and all those other things that, you know, that we're protected from, in a sense, after our baptisms. And that's, again, why catechism is so important, because you need to prepare somebody for reality. You know, a little thing I like to say to people sometimes is, welcome to Orthodoxy, prepare to be disappointed. Because you get a lot of people who are attracted to Orthodoxy because, you know, wow, I really like your mystical theology, and they're reading stuff about, you know, the uncreated light and really high-level spiritual stuff.
Yeah.
Or, you know, they've read some idealized accounts of Orthodox community and they think everybody's going to be a saint. And
then they come here and they see the truth.
Yeah, you get to a parish and you realise...
and obediences, cleaning toilets.
Yeah, you know, that's what, you know, you learn how to really live as an Orthodox Christian by, like, cleaning dishes and do other things like that. You know, and you realise that those, you know, great mystical heights are not something you're going to get straight away, if ever. And that's the thing, you know, prepare to be disappointed, because these fantasies
I read it in a book.
Exactly.
In a book.
And, you know, that's a problem we have nowadays.
I should float on water by now.
That's why catechists need to be very, you know, clear about what's a good book to read for a catechumen and what's not. You know, in the past, you know, things like the Philokalia and that weren't really available to average Joe. And these were kept in monasteries, and, you know, they were integrated into the monastic life. Removed from that and given to somebody in the world, well, there's profitable teachings in there. But when somebody reads that and thinks, well, I'm going to be a hesychast while having a 9-to-5 job, you've got serious problems. You're going to really hurt yourself if you think you can do that. And it's the role of a catechist to say, you know, like, calm down. Read that later, you know, maybe in like 30 or 40 years. But here's Law of God. Read this instead. And, you know...
It's a classic.
That's the boring stuff, though. You know, I don't want to read about the Ten Commandments.
That's the book I read when I was a kid. It was Slavoskoy's.
It's a classic, and that's what people need. You know, St. Paul's very clear. You get the milk, then you get the meat.
Right.
Simple as that. And the milk is what's good, what's bad. 10 Commandments, 7 Sacraments, the creeds, basic stuff, 12 great feasts. You need to know that stuff. You know, if you want to just like dive straight into the Philokalia and all that, you're missing out the basics. And if you miss out the basics, you miss out the foundations, you're not going to be able to build that properly. You know, Rome wasn't built a day, as I say. You know, it's a cliched phrase, but it's, you know, it's a cliche because it's true.
Right.
You know, you can't establish a serious spiritual life in the church purely based on, you know, reading stuff which is way beyond your ability. You know, it's like if you go into karate for the first time, go straight into the black belt class. You know, because you think, I've read a few books, I can manage this. Yeah. You know, you're going to be knocked on your backside straight away. You know, take a white belt and, you know, go down with the kids, and that's what you need to do. So the catechist needs to be careful. I mean, he needs to be discerning as well when he's teaching somebody and all that. So, you know, to see where they're going, you know, and to tailor the books that they're reading to make sure they're getting the right stuff. Now, some people are going to be more advanced than others, and they can handle a bit heavier stuff, but generally, most people just need to stick to the basics. I mean, that's a rule that I firmly stick to for my catechumens, is just get into the basics, and we'll talk about anything more advanced in a few years.
So I have I'm sorry, I'm just
going
off.
Go.
I'm sorry. I'm learning.
I'm happy.
I'm a professional
you're
on the
fire.
mic.
Go
I should start rapping or something.
He's going to have his own Discord channel soon.
Yeah.
So I'm going to give you a scenario, Father. My name is Brad. Okay? I'm 30 years old.
Lean into the microphone so you sound crisp.
Brad.
Okay.
Brad.
Go on.
Brad?
Yeah.
Okay.
Good.
I'm 30 years old. I research Orthodoxy, and I walk into the Orthodox Church for the first time. Okay? And I see Andrei. Andrei sees me. How should Andrei welcome Brad, who's never walked into Orthodox Church, potentially might be Orthodox? How should he kind of welcome me, in a sense?
And is it my duty to welcome him?
We have a duty to be hospitable to people. That's the thing. The influence of American life on Orthodoxy has seen the emergence of, you know, what are generally called ushers in the Protestant church and Orthodox churches. I haven't seen any in Roker parishes. It doesn't seem to be a practice that we have, but I think a lot.
Well, not technically like specifically like one person, but like, you know what I'm talking about? Like Russians and Rokor tend to stick with Russians.
Oh, of course. Well, we'll get to that in a moment.
Okay.
So we have people who are specifically set aside for that purpose in some churches, and they'll see a guy they don't recognise. Welcome to the parish. What's your name? You know, what parish are you normally from? Are you Orthodox? Oh, you're not Orthodox? Okay, well, are you interested in the faith? Here's, you know, this is what we do for catechism classes. I'll get you introduced to the priest afterwards. And they have a set that they do. So the person, you know, they get the information they need and they feel welcomed. And then the person will say, well, go and stand here and just, you know, watch everybody else and see what they do and, you know, make them feel comfortable. That's important. Churches that don't have that, well, it's a bit hit and miss, really. I mean, you know, sometimes they'll walk in, and many parishes, will just assume that this is just another Orthodox guy come to church, and I've never seen him before. Maybe he's from another parish and he's just stopping through or something, and they wouldn't talk to him because maybe he just wants to be left alone. So a lot of people, they don't want to be bothered with in church, so they won't bother the other guy, and they'll never find out that he's come to inquire. So not everybody's really cut out for that kind of thing. Some people are a bit better at talking to visitors and recognising people. Here at the monastery, we have certain monks who are been set aside by the bishop to keep an eye out on things, and if anybody turns up who's new, people direct them to those monks who they know the routine, asking about them, where they're from, if they're, what's their background, if they're interested in the faith, and then, once they've been welcomed in, they'll be shown around, and communications will be made with them, things like that. So, if there's designated people in a parish, it's much easier. As for just parishes without that kind of thing, well, if you see somebody you don't recognise in church, maybe it is somebody who just wants to be left alone, and they'll tell you, leave me alone, please. But if you see somebody you don't recognise, and you're kind of a hospitable, outgoing person, and you're able to talk to somebody, without being too aggressive.
Hi.
So you can go up to them, say hello to them, shake their hand, ask, is this your first time in an Orthodox parish, or are you from another parish? And if they say no, oh, okay, are you Orthodox? No? Oh, okay, well, welcome. Is this your first time in an Orthodox church? Well, you go and stand over here, this is where the men go. You can just watch what we do. And if you're able, you can kind of say to them quietly during the service, okay, the gospel's coming now, this is happening, and, things like that. So quietly guide them, be very gentle, but not overbearing. That's the thing. It takes practice to be just right with these kind of things, because we always have to remember when people come to the church, they're nervous. This person may not have been in a church before. They'll come in, they're scared. So if the first thing, especially if it's a woman, if a woman walks into a church and the first thing she's told is you can't wear those.
I need a head covering or whatever.
They could retreat in tears. It's very important that we. Make sure we maintain the dignity of the temple, but be gentle with people. Would you like one of these? This is what we wear in our church. Some people don't have what we call, the doctors would say, a bedside manner, and they bite people. But you need to be, gentle with newcomers. People are feeling very vulnerable when they walk into a church for the first time, so they need a smile. They need to be reassured. In America, they need a handshake. It doesn't work. Not everywhere does that, but Americans like handshakes. So you make them feel welcome in the church, and if you're able, obviously if you're not involved in kleros or anything like that, you can stand close to them and don't be overbearing, but just gently say to them, okay, this is what's happening now, this is what's happening. Afterwards we have coffee or we're having lunch in the trapeza, come and join us, and then once you get out of church, that's when you can get a full conversation going, find out who this person is, where he's from. Maybe you'd like to speak to Father so-and-so, he'd be very happy to see you and talk to you and help you kind of integrate into the community. Exchange contact details, things like that. But it's and then when the person feels comfortable, then you can start telling them off. No, I'm just joking. You're very careful, people, in the early stages, and that's why catechism, when it begins, it shows people church etiquette. I mean, we don't have to overemphasize this; it's extremely important. But you get some people who emphasize church etiquette to the exclusion of everything else. But you show them how to behave in church, how to act, how to just nod their head, and when somebody starts biting their head off or not doing the right thing correctly, and just to get with it. So it's important. So yeah, we need finesse, if you will, when you're speaking to people, and only some people are capable of that. Some people they just don't know how. Some people are too overbearing and they frighten people. So it's really incumbent on a parish priest to say to certain people, like, you should be the person who keeps an eye on for visitors. Maybe not having official ushers, because some people just find that distasteful. Somebody comes straight to you when you open the door. But somebody who's got an eye on the door, seeing people as they come in, saying, I don't recognise this guy, I'll talk to him. Maybe, see how he behaves in church. If he just stands there and doesn't make the sign of the cross, well, maybe he doesn't know what he's doing. That's probably a sign it's a new person. So somebody who's been in the church a long time, a sober, mature, Orthodox man or a woman who can deal with new women. But we're at a point now where every Orthodox parish in major cities and towns are getting new people quite frequently. Because they're discovering Orthodox on Discord and turning up. There's been a big surge in converts. So I think it's really important now for priests to have laymen who've got an eye on things. Because the priest's busy during the service. He can't
just run out there.
He's facing towards the altar. The cleros are busy. And so you need people in church who are able to highlight a certain person and kind of, show them a bit of special attention to show that they're welcome to the community, and, afterwards we can talk. And then, lay catechists, we mentioned before that people are blessed to do that. I think adult education programs in parishes should have a view of not only just educating people, but making them educators as well. So, the priest can delegate, so he doesn't get too overburdened with catechism. So it's important that people are educated. We need an educated laity. And it helps in many different ways, just, both for catechism and just practical for new people coming to the church. So it's important to know what we're doing.
I agree. I wanted to ask you something about something that could pertain to both young adults and older, more mature ones. There's obviously no universal document or book that can be used to catechize everyone. But in general, is there a book that you found to be your favorite? I wanted to ask, like, for example, is there a book that you found that doesn't really hit all the points perfectly, but is generally good for starters?
Well, I have I've come prepared, if you will. I've got a selection of books that I'd like to present that, I find are the best catechetical materials. But, in terms of a single universal catechism, obviously, such a thing doesn't exist yet. We don't have an official catechism of the Orthodox Church like, the Roman Catholics have, where everything's laid out. Each synod, each local church produces its own. That
could be your thesis someday.
Oh, no, I'd get in trouble. I'd get in a lot of trouble for that.
But since the beginning, the church has endeavoured to create documents, that have presented the faith in basic, easy, accessible ways for people, and they can be used for catechisms. One of the earliest is, of course, the Didache, which is one of the earliest documents that we have, excellent from the early period of the church. And that's really just a simple rundown of what the Orthodox faith is. It's maybe a bit difficult to read for people nowadays because it's not as direct as people want. It's not as black and white. But everything that we believe is in there. And it's, it's very helpful to use maybe, and as part of the catechism, you can go through it with somebody and kind of explain it step by step. But let me just grab the books I have.
I think it goes well. Little presents for the Christmas lights in today.
So one of the earliest catechetical tomes, if you will, is the Catechetical Lectures of St. Cyril of Jerusalem, and it exists in a 2-volume set, which contains 2 sections actually. The first, the main one, is the Catechetical Lectures, and then the second one is the Mystagogical Lectures, which actually takes place after the baptism of the people. So this is, just to highlight that catechism is not to make you a theologian, it's not to make you a professor in dogmatics, it's the basics of the faith. As Bishop Luke here says, what he looks for in somebody who's about to be baptized is they know the creed, they know the great feasts, they know the fasts, and they know how to act in church. They know the services. It's important to be in church and live according to the cycle of the services. So, education and the dogmas and stuff continues afterwards. And that's what St. Cyril of Jerusalem is doing, is after they're baptized, they continue their catechism. So there's a nice 2-volume set, but there's also a kind of more recent one, the Lectures on the Christian Sacraments, which is actually the second part. These are the Mystagogical Lectures of St. Cyril of Jerusalem, and this is a new edition, which is both Greek and English, and is post-catechism because, it's post-baptismal, because this is, explaining the sacraments you're participating in.
So could you read us the titles of the books and the authors as well? So
St. Cyril of Jerusalem, Lectures on the Christian Sacraments. And basically, once you've been baptized in the church, you can now participate in chrismation and Holy Communion and confession and things like that. And he explains them all to the people. There's another one, I wouldn't use this as a catechetical text for people, but it's a very good read, and it encompasses the entirety of the Orthodox faith, and it's the Catechetical Discourse of St. Gregory of Nyssa, again now available in a bilingual translation, and it's the subtitle here is A Handbook for Catechists. So really, this is not for the catechumen itself, I would say, but this is something that we teachers of the faith can read and take, the things that St. Gregory says, the themes, and work that into their own catechism. I mean, we can use this as our guide. So the more advanced patristic catechisms, they're probably too advanced for people nowadays, but we can read them ourselves and we can receive the information for that and maybe the structure, maybe some themes, and we can use them. But in terms of a straightforward catechism, we'll talk about the old school of Orthodox catechisms, of the classic, the golden age of catechisms. Well, the first one, I don't have a copy of the book itself, but it's the Orthodox Confession of Faith by St. Pierre Mohila, which is excellent.
Yeah.
I think it's great. It's very straightforward. It's a typical question and answer format that you find in classic catechisms. It's got some criticisms, but it's been received by the church as a good document, and it's pretty worthwhile to use. And then there's also the Catechism of the Orthodox Church by St. Philaret of Moscow, which is available in many different editions. This is also excellent. Same format, same structure. He basically covers everything in the faith. So the first part of the Catechism is on faith, where he goes through the creed and the sacraments. The second part is the Catechism is on hope, where he goes through the Beatitudes and talks a little bit about spiritual life. And then finally goes through the third part, which is on love, and he goes through the Ten Commandments. Simple stuff. He's not talking about, advanced theology here. He's telling you the basics of understanding Christian faith and living Christian faith, and it's wonderful. There's one that's not very well known that is a personal favourite of mine. So it was introduced to me by Father Daniel Franzen, who teaches here at the seminary as well. And this is the Greek Orthodox Catechism of Father Konstantinos Kallinikos. And this is, again, it's of the old school. He was a Greek Orthodox priest in England, in Manchester, back in the 1920s, I believe, and he published this. So basically, it's divided into 3 sections. Dogmatic, where he talks about the creed. Ethical, where he talks about the moral law, the Ten Commandments, the Sermon on the Mount, etc. And then ceremonial, the different church services, different prayers. Again, very basic stuff, and it's very straightforward. And this was republished in the 1960s here in America by the Greek Church, and because it's such a useful one. He also has an expanded version called The Foundations of the Faith, where he goes through the creed step by step, and he goes into depth on each part of the creed. And I think that's an excellent book as well. Another book that I appreciate is another kind of old school Greek catechism by Archimandrite Athanasius Frangopoulos, Our Orthodox Christian Faith. Hard to find, and it's an interesting story how I found this book. I was on Patmos and on pilgrimage just several months after I was baptised, and I was wandering around the town and I found a used bookstore, so I popped in there to see if there was anything interesting, and there was only one English language book, not obviously being a person who reads Greek, but there was one English language book on the shelf, and it was this. So, back then I was fresh out of the baptismal font. I knew everything. I was on my way to becoming a theologian. I was like, I don't need to read the catechism. I know the basics. I'm on my way to becoming a church father. But then, I was stuck on a train for several hours, and I read this, and again, it's brilliant because it showed me the importance of the basics. And I was reading this book that helped me, learn, brought to me my love of catechisms. That's one of my kind of hobbies is reading catechisms. I like to read catechisms, anything that I can get my hands on, just to see different approaches to teaching the faith and things like that. So this is an excellent book. Again, it starts off with dogmatics, basics of theology, who God is, the creation, original sin. The second part is redemption. He talks about Jesus Christ, the incarnation, the 3 offices of the Lord, the Holy Spirit. Making redemption ours is part 3, where he talks about grace within the church. He talks about the sacraments. And then the fourth part is eschatology. What happens when we die, the soul after death, panikidas and their importance, and then the second coming of the Lord. So it's excellent, and it's very, very thorough book. It's not easy to get a hold of, but if you can, it's a really, really solid introduction to the Orthodox faith. A more recent catechism come out of Greece is The Orthodox Faith, Worship and Life by Hieromonk Gregorius from Mount Athos. This is good. It's quite straightforward, very easy to read, and again, it just covers all the basics. And Hieromonk Gregorius is a very prolific author, maybe 10 or 12 books of his have been translated to English now, mostly very small books talking about various aspects of the spiritual life. All of those, I could say, could be used as catechism. This is your absolute foundation for catechism from Father Gregorius. But the other books can be used as part of catechism to get people to learn more about the virtues, about the passions, about spiritual life, and various other things. So he's a very helpful writer now because he writes in a very accessible and simple manner. But for the king of catechisms for me, and some people might criticise me for this because I've not put Father Seraphim Slobodskoy's Law of God. I highly rate Father Seraphim Slobodskoy's book, but I do believe that it's ever so slightly dated, because simply it was published many, many years ago, and I find this to be the best catechism, and this is the one I give to everybody. And if I have someone in a foreign country who contacts me and asks for Orthodox catechism, I send the Law of God by Father Daniel Sosoev. This is fantastic. It's very, very thorough, but at the same time, it's a very basic and comprehensible level. So the contents for this and the structure is absolutely fantastic. So,
fun fact, by the way, John's mother was a student of Father Seraphim Slobodskoy.
Back in Nyack.
oh, yes, excellent. So, part 1 is the fundamentals of the faith. He talks about divine revelation, holy tradition, holy scripture, the creed, who is an Orthodox Christian. Then he goes, part 2 is the commandments. He talks about ethics, virtues, good and evil, etc. Part 3 is prayer. He talks about prayer. He explores different forms of prayer, how we pray, etc. Candles, incense, etc. And then there's a special collection of prayers here, which is very important. Part of the Catechism is learning the prayers of the Church. Learning the Trisagian prayers, learning prayers before and after meals, etc., etc. Part 4 is the divine services, where he just explains the church services. Part 5 is the sacraments, where he obviously explains the sacraments. And then part 6 and 7 are history, and this constitutes like 80% of the book is history. He starts with the creation of the world all the way up until the Lord's second coming, and that's, I think, really, really important nowadays for people coming into the church. It's not just the concepts of the faith, but how it's been manifest in history. He's talking about the Old Covenant, all the history of ancient Israel up to the coming of the Saviour. And then, he covers the history of the church. And that's very important for a catechumen to know how the church has lived, how the church has adapted to different situations. He goes through the communist persecutions in the Soviet Union and right up to the modern day. It's absolutely fantastic. And history is an often overlooked part of catechism. And as well as the doctrinal books of catechism, other books I always give to my catechumens to read for their own spiritual development and for the spiritual fortification, if you will. How to Live a Holy Life by Metropolitan Gregory of St. Petersburg. It's a classic 19th century manual of piety, if you want to call it that, and it's good because it shows you how far we're fallen from the tree. It basically tells you how you should live daily life as an Orthodox Christian, and then you read it and you realise, wow, I'm nowhere near that. This is just an average 19th century Russian person who, takes the faith seriously. But then we compare ourselves to that and think, wow, we're nothing like they were back then. It shows you that, and it's humbling because you get people now who come into the church and they have long prayer ropes and they think they can achieve great spiritual heights.
And grow out their beards and hair.
Yeah.
Well, it's not about the externals per se, it's about the misconceptions. And you give them how to live a holy life and say, master this first. And then you can maybe go into something much higher. And you realise it's quite a spiritual struggle to get the basics done. And that's so important for people nowadays to realise basics. Basics in faith, basics in practice. And we need to work up from the bottom. A little bit more advanced, but a very helpful book is The Struggle for Virtue by Vladika Verki, the former abbot of Jordanville. Asceticism in a Modern Secular Society. And this is a bit more advanced in its concepts and things like that, but it's very helpful for us to learn about the spiritual struggles, especially people living in the contemporary world. So it helps people to realise the main problems and how we're all afflicted with them and how to overcome them. And it has a significant amount of critique of the world around us, so we can really kind of discern what's happening, how we respond to things. And Father Seraphim Moses, referred to Vladika Verki as a pillar of orthodoxy. And, part of catechism is to do what Father Seraphim, did, was to start to cultivate an orthodox worldview in people. So again, faith, the doctrines, praxis, prayer, fasting, etc., and just how to think, how to view the world as an Orthodox Christian. That's part of the process of catechism, is to have that inner transformation of the mind, so we can start to see things as they really are. And reading somebody like Vladika Verki, and of course Father Seraphim knows, is extremely important for that nowadays. And the final book that I give to catechumens is, as well as recommending to read any and all Lives of the Saints, is The New Martyrs of Russia. Why? Because this is very helpful for people nowadays, because the new martyrs of Russia are very close to us in terms of chronology. These are modern saints. We can read about the ancient saints, and they're very edifying, and they're quite miraculous lives, and they're very, quite wonderful. But the new martyrs confessors of Russia, we know about these people. We have photographs of them. There's videos of them. There's recordings of them speaking. These were mostly normal people living in extraordinary times. And that's so important for Orthodox Christians now to realise. how these people responded to crazy situations, to put it lightly. We look around society nowadays, that's lost its mind pretty much, and we can learn from the new martyrs, how they responded to a society which was turned on its head. And as we know, at the time of the Bolshevik Revolution, one of the elders of Russia said, "What begins today in Russia ends in America." And Father Seraphim Rose used to put in all of his books. It might even be in here, actually.
Did Solzhenitsyn say that?
No, it was an elder. I think it was Elder Ignatius. It's not in this copy of the book, but inside a lot of books published by St. Herman's Press, they said, "Today Russia, tomorrow America." So we are here. I'm living in America. My catechumens are living in America. So I get them to read the New Martyrs of Russia, because this could happen tomorrow, next week, next month, 10 years from now. Doesn't matter when. If we've imbibed the spirit of the new martyrs just by reading their lives and their struggle, we will know to some degree how to respond when it really takes a downturn here. So this is helpful. So it's not just preparing people to understand the faith and come to church, but how to survive as part of catechism. That's part of Orthodox life, is surviving in a world which effectively hates God, and people need to learn to overcome that, and how to respond to the various situations that the evil one throws in their direction. So reading the lives of the new martyrs, I think, is very important for catechumens.
Now, I'm sure the people at home who are already Orthodox, Father Theodore would agree that these are good books for them to read too.
A whole lot. Library.
If you haven't before,
here.
Like Andre probably needs to read every single one of those books.
Yeah.
Read them again, and then keep reading it until the day you die, because you can never have enough catechism. Like I said, I eat catechisms. I pick them up, I read them, and then I'll pick them up again later, and I'll find more catechisms and I'll read them, because it's good to go over the basics again and again and again and again, especially if you have a teaching role. We need to know how to teach the basics. So if we read Father Daniel Sasoev, if we read Father Seraphim Slobodskoy, we can read Metropolitan or Saint Philip out of Moscow. We know how different holy men have articulated the faith to people, and we can pick that up from them. We need to go over the basics frequently. So I can't recommend it enough.
Agreed. Thank you, Father. I appreciate this.
Thank you for your time.
Father.
I learned a lot today, and I hope that everyone watching also did. Everyone listening also learned something. It's been a great conversation, and we look forward to having you here again. Thank you, Father.
Thank you.
Glory to God.